Aloha, I'm Evan Leong from Brain Gain Hawaii, and welcome to today's Save Hawaii Jobs and Businesses webinar for May 5, 2020. It's kind of crazy. We've been doing this for over a month, so this is our 10th webinar for this series. If this is new for you, we have a resource folder with updated memos and previous webinar videos on YouTube. Buddy put that in the chat box, so please take a look at those if you haven't looked at them yet, because a lot of the questions can be answered with that information. So please let me introduce our team for today. We have Jane Sawyer, who's the District Director for Hawaii's SBA and our champion for Hawaii small businesses. Darren Leong is a specialist in employment law from the Law Office of Darren R. Leong. Stacy Katakura is the CEO of Accumulus, which is an outsourced CFO and accounting firm. Jeff Harris is a specialist in employment law and a senior named partner at the Torkelson Law Firm. Buddy Leong is an analyst here at Brain Gain Hawaii. He handles our communications, our backend and chat box. And Koko Leong is our editor at Brain Gain Hawaii, in charge of content, YouTube channel, and podcast. Questions for today, we'll take it through the Q&A module only. That's located at the bottom of the screen. If you post your question in the chat box, it won't be answered, and Buddy will ask you to post it in the Q&A. Please upvote the questions in the Q&A module, and then we'll be taking the ones at the top with the most votes toward the latter part of the webinar, like we have been doing in the last few. Please note, this is a fully volunteer effort. Our team has personally answered hundreds of questions, email threads, and hundreds of billable hours have been donated. And our legal disclaimer, this information is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as legal or tax advice. Please consult your attorney or accountant to discuss your particular business situation. SBA's participation in this presentation is not an endorsement of the views, opinions, products, or services of any of the participants, persons, or entities. All SBA programs and services are extended to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. This information is current as of today, May 5, 2020. And let's get started with Jane Sawyer. Thank you.
Aloha, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us again. I'm here to give you a quick update on what's going on with the COVID-19 response programs and financial assistance from the Small Business Administration. It can hardly believe that it's just been about a month since we really started rolling all of these programs out and the activity and the response that we've gotten across the nation, but also from our small business community here in Hawaii. We started round 2 of the PPP loan program, working here with all the banks, with a few of the fintechs that are serving folks, and have had quite a rousing response. As of May 1st, that's barely a week into the round 2, we have had over 7,700 approvals for Hawaii businesses. And that means about another $413,825,000 coming into Hawaii small businesses to help keep people on the payroll and sustain small businesses until we can get open for business again. So that means a lot of you are really gearing up because you should have been receiving funds into your bank accounts and closing loans with the local banks. They've been working around the clock to help you and get the dollars to your business. So I hope things are moving along. And if you have questions, you're finding resource people in your community to help you and answer those questions. Again, if you have questions, you can go to www.sba.gov. We are still taking PPP applications because across the nation, we have made 2.2 million loans for $1.75 billion. So that means that there's more money left there. Excuse me, that's $175 billion, not 1.75. So about a little more than half the fund was gone by last Friday. Loans have been coming in, so that dollar amount is going down, but we're seeing it spread out over time and a lot more of the funding going to smaller businesses, probably like Hawaii businesses, more mom and pops, more independent contractors and sole proprietors. The average size loan right now is about $79,000. So there's a lot more out there. It's getting spread around a little bit more. If you're interested or you haven't submitted an application yet or don't know your status, check with your bank. go online, go to their website, see if they're still accepting loans or loan applications. And again, another shout out, fintechs are considering applications. Many of them have been approved by SBA for that purpose. So you can check out Square or Cabbage or PayPal and see if they can process loans. Sometimes that's a good way to go for a smaller loan and quick application. If you're concerned that maybe you shouldn't apply, you have questions about it, great places to go to get advice from experienced consultants are like the Hawaii Small Business Development Center or the Patsy Mink Center for Business and Leadership, the Veterans Business Outreach Center. You can find all these guys, just Google them. They're here in Hawaii, they are trained consultants. They've been doing business here for a while, and they can help you kind of walk through, how do I fill out my application? What does this mean if I have to certify certain conditions about my business? How do I determine what my payroll is, because I don't really write myself a payroll check? So there is help out there, and you probably have a little bit more time to apply. We encourage you to do that. We know that business should be slowly opening up again, and you want to be ready. So these may be funds that can help you just cover some of the expenses that you may not have anticipated, help you get your employees back, engage them before the doors are open, and you're ready to go. So we've also opened up the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. That's a direct loan from SBA. Again, go to sba.gov, click at the yellow banner at the top, and you can pick PPP or Economic Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL. That loan program is a little bit different. We are still processing the applications. A lot of people are getting that big surprise in their bank accounts because the SBA is not announcing to you. If you're getting in advance, you may discover that you've got a couple of thousand that shows up with the line SBA Treasury in your bank account. That means your bank, you are continuing to go through the processing queue. They've opened up again to accept new applications or updates on those early applications. If you put in an early application before March 29th and you have a 10-digit number that begins with a 2, go to sba.gov, select the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and update your application. You're already in queue, you won't lose your place, but it updates your application, gives you the best information, and also makes you eligible for that advance. And the advance is kind of like your ticket. It tells you that you're in line, and they begin processing your loan. So go ahead and take a look at that. Again, brand new applications are open for agricultural business. Farmers, ranchers here in Hawaii can go to the EIDL location and submit an application for these loans. They can be paired with a PPP loan, but this loan will give you more working capital. It does need some credit checking. It is a $2 million loan, up to 30 years to pay this one off. So it is structured a little bit differently. If you haven't taken a look or put in an application and you're a farmer, rancher, ag business, take a look at that and recommend you check that out in the next day or so. Okay, I think that's a wrap, unless there are any questions for SBA, and we can get on to more detailed questions and concerns that people have as we get back to business here in Hawaii.
Jane, there was one question that already got upvoted, which is any chance for an extension of the June 30th date, since many folks are just receiving PPP funding?
You know, I think that's a great question, and just the logic and the basic logistics that you're looking at would say that that needs to happen. So I would say stay tuned, watch for, if you're not on our mailing list, send a note to the district office at hawaiigeneral@sba.gov and say, I need to get on your mailing list. Stay tuned for these programs, because I think we are expecting to have more rules come out in the next couple days, definitely on how to use the proceeds, on how long we have to use the funds. Perhaps that will go to a rolling date. And I don't know exactly what steps need to be taken, but SBA and Treasury are in consultations right now as we speak to figure out some of these really critical questions to make this package of loans and financial assistance be effective. So please stay tuned, and we are in favor of making those changes.
All right, thank you, Jane. You know, as Evan said, it's been a little bit over a month now. So and many of you, it's a pretty consistent group at this point. So many of you have been with us for 8 webinars or so. So I should probably give at least some brief explanation of who everyone is and the relationships. We've talked about Jane, our fearless district director from the SBA. And then with respect to the non-government employed persons on these webinars. So you've heard Evan, who does the intros at the top and handles a lot of the leadership and logistics. And also you've heard Buddy's name and Koko. Buddy and Koko are young adults. Evan is my brother. The other two are folks with advanced degrees, and that is Stacy and Jeff. Stacy is the CPA on our team, and Jeff Harris is another employment attorney in town like myself, except Jeff has roughly twice the experience that I do in the field. The fact that they have volunteered this amount of time, energy, when they are also running their businesses, I think should just absolutely be commended. They have, you know, their own businesses that they run on the side, yet they've done this for a full month with us now, basically just to put good karma into the world. They're doing a wonderful job, and I just wanted to publicly give a shout out to them. Okay, we're gonna do something a little bit different, which is we'd like to get a sense from you of sort of where some of you are. So we're gonna try to run a poll right now, and Buddy is going to put that up. And there are, I think, 4 questions. They should have popped up on your screen right now, and then we will actually see the answers as they occur. So if you could just take a second and do that now, that would be great. I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that. And Buddy will compile those answers. This is the first time we're doing it. One of the main reasons why we want to poll what week of funding you folks are in is it's our sense of it that the deeper into the 8 weeks you are, sort of the more pressing the questions become as to what a full-time equivalent is, and to the extent we don't yet have an absolute definition what you can do about it. So, you know, we're sort of balancing how much we sort of go out on a limb on that kind of stuff. Okay, so I understand that almost everyone should be through that poll process. Once that's done, Buddy will post some answers maybe in the chat, or they can let me know how that's going to occur. We also want to know whether this twice a week webinar format is useful, or whether we should now dial it back to once a week. Okay, so the major forgiveness guidance that came out this week is a Q&A from the SBA and Treasury. That Q&A is, I believe, number 40 on the ever-growing list of Q&As from SBA and Treasury. And basically what it says is, for the situations where you offer an employee to come back to work, and those are offers for what the SBA describes as full salary and wages and hours, and what happens when the employee rejects that offer. And so what they've clarified is those situations, you will not be penalized on forgiveness under the headcount rules. So, which is rule number 4 in our forgiveness memo. In order to do it correctly, basically you need to offer the full wages and hours in writing to the employee. And then when they reject it, you need to document the rejection. So they don't need to necessarily respond in writing, but you need to document that they rejected the offer. And what SBA has said is that will not affect you on rule number 4, which is the FTE headcount rule. I think though, and Jeff and Stacy can weigh in on this, I think though it still has an impact if that employee does not come back on the 75-25 rule. So for example, if you don't have those wages being paid as to that time frame over the 8 weeks for an employee, and you have less employees, you might not be able to spend that entire 75% on payroll costs. And that will, I think, still proportionally reduce the overall forgiveness. So I think it goes back to what we've said before, which is if an employee refuses to come back, you could replace them with a new employee. That's a situation where a replacement, I think, clearly would be allowed. The last thing that Q&A did was to re-emphasize to both employers and employees that any employee who refuses such an offer of full salary and wages and hours may very well forfeit unemployment, which is something we've discussed on prior webinars. So that is the guidance. At least it's one tidbit that is, one of the major questions that's being asked. There are several others obviously still out there on forgiveness, and hopefully we will get an answer shortly on more forgiveness guidance. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff on a couple of issues. One is current EEOC, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the federal agency that handles employment discrimination claims and that sort of thing. Some confusion that's sort of been out there with EEOC guidance, and I'll hand it over to Jeff for that.
Darren, I'll cover the certification first and then go to the EEOC if that's okay.
Yes.
Everybody put May 14th on their legal pad. The Treasury and the SBA have issued 3 out of the 41 questions and answers on the certification that you had on your loan application that said current economic uncertainty makes the loan necessary to support ongoing operations. The most recent Q&A issued today extended the deadline to give the money back from May 7th to May 14 if you determine that that certification, when given, was untrue or potentially untrue. And the other thing to remember about that certification is you can expect SBA and Treasury attorneys to be spending the next, based on past experience, 5 to 10 years determining whether or not that certification was honest when it was made. So it's important for those of you that have loans. I know many of you adequately can support that certification, but you should be prepared to show that. And the reason I say that is the way you should be able to support it is you should look at the cash you have on hand, you should look at the expected revenues, and you should look at your line of credit, any line of credit you have, and say, even if I had all those things, if I didn't have this extra money, I wouldn't be able to keep employees. I would have had to furlough them. And the only reason I can think about bringing people back is because I got this money. And we're not recommending that you give the money back. We're recommending that you go to a trusted financial advisor, that you take a really good look at whether that certification was good, because you're not going to, that certification just wasn't an idle certification to get the money. It's something that you're going to live with over the next 5 to 10 years. SBA and Treasury are still litigating over certifications people made 10 years ago for TARP in 2009. Again, 3 out of the 41 Q&As that have been issued have been basically on this issue, and they've been the more recent ones. Turning now to the EEOC, many of you may have seen in the news coverage this morning, the major East Coast newspapers carried it, and some of the legal press carried it. They said, those publications said, the EEOC has clarified you can tell a person that's particularly susceptible to contracting the virus to stay home, old people or people with severe medical conditions. And EEOC jumped down the paper's throats and said, no, that's not what we meant. They issued a clarification a couple hours ago saying that they haven't said that and they'll clarify it. The other thing that they have said, and this is a particularly appropriate focus for right now that the governor just issued today. Heck, he's opening shopping centers and pet groomers and a number of other outfits in his 7th proclamation that he issued today. He's announced that, you know, we're going back to work. We may have to wear masks. We may have to stay socially distanced. But the other recommendation we have for you to consider is think about screening temperature at the entrances to your workplaces. The EEOC has particularly said that's okay under the circumstances of this virus. And there are a number of devices available on the market that allow temperature screening to take place just by people walking by. There are other tests that might be appropriate if someone has a fever or if you want to go the extra mile. But the point is, I'm recommending that you at least consider those sort of tests as you reopen your businesses, particularly because the EEOC has approved those sort of tests for employees. And it's pretty hard to keep the workplace safe if you test your employees, but you don't test your other service providers and customers. Now, that being said, before you test, particularly your employees and your customers, you should notify them in writing that you're going to do that. You should be prepared to discuss any objections they have to that, and you should disclose the results to them, especially if the results are positive and suggest the virus or some other reason to exclude them from the workplace, and then perhaps do some follow-up tests. That's all I have, Darren.
Thank you, Jeff. So I actually think these poll results are kind of fascinating. On the once a week or twice a week question was 42% for twice a week, 58% for once a week. So we'll take that into account and figure out a schedule, and in our email blast, etc. We will let you know. I see Buddy just had the answers pop up on the screen. Essentially, everyone here virtually applied for and was approved for a PPP loan. I think the stats on the round 2 are actually very, very encouraging, which is that as of last Friday, 56% of the total money was used, but Hawaii had issued through SBA 7,700 loans in round 2. And on that pacing, we should have hopefully at least till the end of this week. So it is my hope that we'll clear the entire backlog, hopefully for Hawaii, or very close to it. On the question of what week of funding you folks are in, this one is all over the board. So there are actually 4% that are in the 4th week or later of funding. There are 20% in the 3rd week, 31% in the 2nd week, 23% in the 1st week, and 22% that have not been funded or dispersed yet, which means this answer is just completely spread out across the board. One of the things that Jeff, Stacy, and I have been discussing is that the deeper into this time period, in terms of thinking about, how to try to meet an FTE full-time equivalent headcount definition, so you don't get reduced on forgiveness without actually knowing the definition. What you could possibly do. I'll hand it over to Stacy, but my initial thought on this is if you are providing the same both hours and number of employees, you have a very good shot of meeting whatever definition ends up being applied, whether it's an hours-based definition or a headcount-based one. So I think that is one route that you can have some confidence even without an actual definition. Stacy, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I think absent any definition, I think the best way, I think the intent of the act was to keep employees paid during the 8-week period and as many employees as possible. So whatever look back period that you choose, I think that your best practice would be to look at what your head count during that period was and keep the same amount of full-time employees that you had then on staff and look at the hours that you paid or any part-time employees. In addition to, I have answered a lot of questions about, how much to pay your employees, especially if they might be on commission, if they're hourly with tips. So I would look at how much you paid those people on average in total during the look back period. During the full calendar quarter prior to receiving your funds, and make sure that you're maintaining that same average pay.
Yeah, I mean, there's in sort of thinking about the certifications that talk about maintaining payroll and retaining workers, which suggests that you should be keeping sort of levels that existed before. And also this most recent Q&A that talks about an offer to an employee of full salary and wages and hours. The question immediately becomes, well, as compared to what? There's a few different timeframes that appear in different parts of the rules. So in the loan amount itself, that's based off of 2019 in total or the prior 1 year. In terms of rule number 4, which is the headcount rule, that look back period is a choice between a period that's in the early mid of last year, 2019, or the first 2 months of this year. And then the third time period is the rule number 5, which is the employee pay reduction rule, which is the last full calendar quarter, which I presume is January, February, March. I tend to lean toward the most recent quarter in pay when you're talking about maintaining payroll, because I think of it as maintaining from whatever it just was. So I think it makes sense that it would be the most recent calendar quarter. You can probably tell, though, that we're going sort of further on the limb as we talk about these things, because none of this has been clarified with certainty by the SBA or the Treasury yet. We're just trying to decipher the bits and pieces and crumbs that we have so far to provide the as best of a educated guess as what these rules are ultimately going to say when they are finally issued with clarity, because a bunch of you are in your 3rd week already. So that's at least my thought on it. Stacy, I promised you to be in charge of Q&As, so have at it.
So I just wanted to say before I started too, May 7th, this coming Thursday is going to be the start of the 8 weeks prior to June 30th. So we're really, really hoping that we'll get some guidance on these big questions about what is an FTE and what does the term payments made and costs incurred mean. So the first question I see here, I received my loan money on 4/28/20. Do I have 8 weeks ending 6/28/20 to use this money for allowable forgivable usages, or do I have until June 30th? So in order, the 8 weeks is the forgiveness period. You can use the funds beyond the 8 weeks, but we believe that will be beyond the 8 weeks, but until June 30th. And just that portion that's outside of your 8-week period would be converted to a loan. This one was directed at James, but I think we can probably answer it. When can we expect clarification as to how subsequent idle advances after PPP loan amounts? Does it make it so we would have a surplus equal to idle remaining from PPP funds received? So I think the answer to that is, so to the extent that you have applied for an idle and you got an advance and you also applied for a PPP, your forgiveness amount is reduced by the idle advance that you received, presumably because your PPP loan amount was sized based on the maximum amount that you qualify for forgiveness. So next one, I'm curious about specifics of FTEs and forgiveness. I was not able to get all my same people back at the same rate, so I'm hoping that I can have an overall equivalent number of people in hours. I'm looking for specific guidance around FTEs, overall hours of the job titles, pay rates, hours don't match, but the overall 75% goes towards payroll. So I think, Darren, do you want to take that? I think you already kind of addressed that at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have an answer as to what the full-time equivalent definition is going to be. If I was to make my best guess, I would think that there would be some hours component to it. The most similar analog is one from the Affordable Care Act, but the SBA and the Treasury has not told us specifically they're going to use that definition. So, I mean, we're holding back on prognosticating exactly what the definition of FTE is. We understand that's problematic because a bunch of you are deep into your 8-week period. So I think that having, you know, an employee continue with the same hours and the same number of employees is probably going to meet whatever definition that comes out, because whether it's a headcount definition or whether it's an hours-based one or whether it's a combination of the two, if your headcount remains essentially constant and is maintained, and your pay and hours maintains constant and is maintained, then you're likely going to meet that definition. But to cut it more thin than that, I don't think we're able to do that at this point. Okay. Oh wait, I think I might have dismissed the wrong question. Sorry about that if I did.
Darren, there was one on how do you determine whether or not my loan was necessary? I had some headroom.
Why don't you rehash some of the comments on that, Jeff?
There's a number of questions on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's going to be, the question is going to be, when you got your loan, what did you know? Was it necessary to maintain normal operations? If you had some headroom, if you had some money saved up, if you anticipated normal revenues, if you had a line of credit, then I'd talk seriously to your CPA or your advisor about whether or not you should give that money back by May 14th. And you should be, if you're unable to show that you did not have headroom, that you had a good reason not to expect revenues, and that you did not have a line of credit, or it was going to be used for other purposes, then I'd carefully document that and feel satisfied. But absent that, I'd take a real hard look with your advisor about whether or not you can show that the loan was necessary. And there are plenty of people where it was obviously necessary. You already laid off your folks a month ago and you don't have pennies in the bank and you don't have a line of credit. But absent that, absent some sort of other option to pay your employees and keep them online, understand that this is a question about what you were thinking when you got the loan, but it's an answer that will be looked at by government attorneys years from now, potentially. particularly for you larger borrowers.
Yeah, and so to recap some of the things we covered in the last two webinars, every loan over $2 million will be audited. That is a rule that the SBA and Treasury have issued. And then a certain number of the loans smaller than that will still be audited, or as the the SBA calls it, will be reviewed. We did issue a memo on this because we thought the guidance, like many other aspects of the law currently, sort of is not the clearest or most specific. So we do have a memo on the Google Drive that tries to tease out what the factors may be in establishing, necessary to maintain operations. I think there is some hope for clarity now, because essentially with the extension to May 14th, what the SBA also said in the same breath was that they are going to issue more clarification about what it means to be necessary to maintain operations. So I think we can expect, hopefully several days before May 14th, some further clarification so that companies can make determinations with good information about whether they meet the certification requirements. Just a side note, because I think there was a chat. This is not my house. It's a virtual background. So anyway, Stacy.
And we vote before the presentation on which one he uses. You will recall, yes, he was in another house the last couple times.
So Stacy, this is an issue that has come up a bunch of times now. So the rules for calculating loan amounts say you're supposed to subtract the advance from idle from your loan amount when it's calculated. However, those rules came out for many people weeks after the loan amounts were calculated. So what do people do about, they're getting idle loans and grants dropped into their bank accounts now unannounced, and what do they do as it what do they do as it relates to the PPP loan?
So I think the guidance says that you should reduce your forgiveness will be reduced by the amount of idle advance that you received. And I think what's confusing is the idle loans were made available before the PPP funding, before the CARES Act. And if you look at the allowable uses of both, idle actually has broader uses. You can use it for I can't remember the expenses that you have not been able to pay due to revenue losses, which kind of indicates you can use it to pay your independent contractors, vendors that are not eligible to be used for payments out of loan funds. I mean, out of the PPP loan funds. There is no time limit, so you can use it after June 30th. You can also use it for some of the same uses as you use as a PPP is used for as well. So to the extent that you are using idle for the same purposes as a PPP, you were supposed to refinance the idle with the PPP loan proceeds. So you can't use it for the same amounts. But in any event, I think what I said earlier, because your PPP loan size, there's a formula for that, you're not eligible for forgiveness in excess of your PPP loan amount. So if you so I think the idle advance was intended to kind of tie you over before you got your PPP loan proceeds. So I think the thought behind that was your forgiveness should be reduced because in essence you received more than you were allowed to be received based on that formula.
Stacy, some actual fairly quick questions. I'll just feed them to you. Utilities, maintenance fees with water included, is that considered a utility?
That's a hard question. You know, that's another area that hasn't been clearly identified or defined by the SBA or Treasury. Water is clearly included as a utility, but I don't know. I don't believe maintenance fees would be. That's kind of a gray area.
For independent contractors and sole proprietors, is our contribution to Social Security, self-employment tax, etc. I'm assuming this refers to both the employer side and the employee side for this sole proprietor. Is that considered forgivable?
Unfortunately, no, it's not. That's I know for employers, the employer portion is not an allowed cost, but the employee side is. For independent contractors and sole proprietors, that is not an allowable cost, unfortunately. And I think the thought behind that is the amount that you're allowed to draw from the PPP loan is your gross pay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I just want to dig into that to be real clear on it. So if I'm essentially like a sole proprietor, single member LLC, but I pay taxes as if I'm paying FICA and Medicare fully on all of my revenue. So I pay both the employer portion and the employee portion. So I think the question on the table is the employer portion of that tax that I pay, is that considered a payroll cost? Definitely the employer portion doesn't count, but the employee portion, by virtue of me being a sole proprietor, do I still get to count that, I guess?
I don't believe so, and I think the fact that you are able to you're able to pay yourself whatever draw you have, in other words, your gross pay, which would have been included if you were an employee. That I think that's the thought behind that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. We got our PPP loan. Let's pass this one to Jeff, since I feel like we're leaving him out. So we got our PPP loan from BOH today. Question: can we use the PPP loan to pay back payroll for March? I think this one is a pretty clear one. Jeff.
I'm proud to say you can see there that several of our participants already answered that for us.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not showing.
and the answer is, again, right now the statute says that the expense needs to be incurred or accrued and paid within the 8 weeks after you receive the loan disbursement. So the payroll worked in April, you couldn't reimburse yourself out of PP proceeds for that, because the payroll in April was accrued before you got the loan disbursement. We may get some clarification on that, but as it stands right now, the pay for hours worked but before the loan disbursement would not be accrued within 8 weeks and would not be forgivable.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff, the next one also is the relationship for a sole proprietor, between unemployment and PPP, and can you do both? Can you overlap? Can you do one following the other? What's your take on that?
My take on that is, administratively, people are having some difficulty doing that. The folks that have applied for unemployment as independent contractors have been told by the department that they can't get the pool of money. I disagree with that, but I'm not administering that program. It appears that the pool of money should stack on top of anybody that receives unemployment. Is that the question?
Well, the question is, I think, whether you can collect unemployment and use PPP funds at the same time, or can you use
No.
them in, yeah, yeah.
No.
However,
No.
prior to the point at which your PPP amount is dispersed and your 8 weeks begins, could you get unemployment during that time period?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
and as a
then,
matter of fact, that would support your certification that you don't have any money and need the PPP loan to operate.
yeah. And then on the back end, because the federal unemployment subsidy actually goes to July 31st. So once you run out of that 8 weeks of PPP funds, then can you go back on unemployment at least till July 31st?
Technically, but I'm not going to answer for our director of Department of Labor. He's real busy these days.
Yeah. If next question, we'll stick with Jeff for this. If I received a PPP loan and now realize that I will not be able to meet the 75% payroll costs and qualify for forgiveness, can I renegotiate my loan to a lower amount? I'm going to reinterpret this question to say, can I give some or part or all of it back?
Yes, you should speak to your advisor, and we strongly suggest you consider doing that.
Okay. Is it okay if the payroll amount is over 75% and the other allowable expenses are below 25%?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's and sorry, Jennifer, email this one, 'cause, I'm not going to digest it quick enough. So I know you have our email addresses, so
Yeah, there's like a bunch there.
email that. Stephen's more of a comment than a question. I would just say for independent contractors and self-employed individuals, the most specific guidance that's been issued on this is the third interim final rule. So that is available on the Treasury website, and it is the final rule that is entitled interim final rule on additional eligibility criteria and requirements for certain pledges of loans. It's on the Treasury's page where all of those are contained. Let me bring Zoom back. Suzanne writes, I was told I received PPP yesterday and it said the loan starts on March 1. That does not make sense to me. You may want to check with the bank.
She probably means May 1.
Oh, okay. Then May 1 would be your, whenever you get the money into your bank account, that's the trigger date. So the 8 weeks begins at that point in time.
We're getting so many questions about the same thing. Accrued, and let's say it again. Accrued means an employee accrues wages today when they work today. You pay the wages if you pay them today. Okay, the statute says the wages have to be both accrued and
incurred.
Incurred. Okay,
Yeah.
incurred and paid within the 8-week period. So I guess you could argue that you don't incur the wages until they're due.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're basically holding back on this because the literal definition of a cost incurred and a payment made, a cost incurred literally would be if I worked the hour in this window, that would be when it's incurred. Or if the vacation accrues on a particular date, that's when it technically would be incurred. The problem is that there are so many examples that make this impractical for this 8-week period that I think there's a very good chance that at some point SBA is going to say that, some guidance that says something that may have been quote unquote triggered outside of the period but paid within it will count. But without that guidance, again, it's just we can't say with any certainty until we have that guidance, and hopefully it comes within the next couple days.
And when it comes, depending on what it is, you can readjust your accounts and compensate, internally compensate accordingly.
Yeah. So let's close out on an interesting question that I've been sort of thinking about, which is essentially bonuses, hazard pay, any kind of pay that increases the amount that's going to an employee. I think the kind of countervailing sort of arguments here are, number one, for a number of employers, in order to get to 75% payroll costs of the total loan amount, it will require an increase in pay for employees over what they were previously paid. On the flip side, the argument is that, hey, this money is to maintain payroll, which suggests that it's not to increase payroll. So I think those two things are in tension. So Jeff, go ahead on your thoughts on that.
Counter argument, hazard pay. Most of the employees that come back to work are going to be performing different functions. They're going to be, particularly in a retail environment, that it's going to be a different and more scary environment. And so there may be many situations where you can justify some sort of hazard or retention bonus. But as we've said previously, don't just hand out that money because you have it, that extra bonus money because you have it. Articulate a legitimate business reason why you're giving that bonus. Such as, there was a question about a dentist with staff exposed to additional hazard in the office. I could see some additional hazard premium, or some additional function that you're having employees perform that they didn't perform before that merits adjusting their pay.
Yeah. Okay. I think we will close it out. Stacy, any last comments on Cinco de Mayo?
No, I don't think I have. The only thing I did maybe want to make just a quick comment. I did see in the poll that there were a handful of you that didn't apply for the PPP. The funds are still available. I think at least ASB and CPP are accepting applications. So if you're considering it, you feel like you could use some help or that you need it, I would urge you to apply before the funds run out.
Yeah, I mean, based on sort of the up and downs of tracking the stats and what we thought would happen in round two and all the people who did not get funded in round one, I think it's a minor miracle that it looks like we are going to clear virtually our entire backlog, and almost anyone who applied on a kind of semi-timely basis looks like they will get a loan. That is tremendous news. The average loan size in this round for Hawaii is $54,000 as opposed to 150 or something like that in round one. It says that these 7,700 loans are truly going to small businesses, all of you out there who are, 5 employees, 2 employees, 10, making, it work and making Hawaii go. So we are very encouraged to see that. And we're going to, I think, at least for the near future, try to keep providing information as it comes out about PPP forgiveness and other issues that arise. We thank you for sticking with us. We know that this has been ever increasing in sort of SBA rules, ambiguity, some guidance, some lack of other guidance, and we know it is difficult to navigate. So we will stick with you and wish you a great week, and we will see you at the next one. Thank you so much.